Hey everybody, it's Richard Harris and Scott Lees here with another episode of Surf and Sales Podcast. We have a really fun and interesting guest today. I met Andy, I guess, it was 2011-ish. We were working at a company called Mashery. I think you were the product manager, correct?
I ran product marketing at Mashery.
Product marketing. And so the thing I always liked about Andy was that Andy got sales. Andy got it like in a very different way than most people I'd seen in marketing. And in fairness, I probably hadn't been at enough good startups where this exists. But everything I would talk to Andy about, there was always he could just understand what we were trying to accomplish from the sales side and how to interpret that to the marketing side. And it was beautiful. So Andy Raskin, thank you for joining us. And we don't really have a title, which you'll explain because we don't know how to introduce you other than you wrote this really cool Medium post one day that blew up.
That's fine. You can introduce me like that. The guy who wrote that Medium post. If people haven't read it, it's the one I think you're talking about. It's called The Greatest Sales Deck I've Ever Seen. Yep. I have this problem. I've been going to like grad school reunions, and I got an MBA, so everybody's got their name, their company, title. Mine said Andy Raskin Self-Employed. So it's like this. It's the shame that I have to bear of sort of and others who kind of have this company of one thing. But yeah, I guess I just in my LinkedIn bio it says strategic messaging and positioning, which is just sort of what people seem to call this stuff. So that's what I've gone with for now.
I guess we're all three of us are self-employed.
I actually like that because it kind of makes people, they're going to kind of go, oh, they're unemployed. And it's kind of like, no, you don't take that judgment on me.
Yeah. I have people who ask me all the time how my retirement is going.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
I don't work for a company, so I must be retired now.
So Andy, for those who don't know you, what is your background? Like, were you always in product marketing? Like even before Mashery, right? In the 2000s, before we hit the teens, what were you doing business-wise? Were you ever in sales officially? Have you always been a marketer? Like, what was that like for you?
So I started from a very different place. I actually was a computer science major undergrad, and I was a coder coming out of school. And it was kind of late 90s. I was working for this technology consulting firm, and a colleague and I had an idea for an app. This is like 97, so we're talking Windows app. And of the two of us, I spoke English fluently. He was Japanese. And so we decided, we coded a prototype, and we decided, okay, I should probably write the business plan because I speak English. So I wrote the plan.
What was the app, though, before you talk about the plan? What was the app? What was it supposed to do?
So without getting into too many details, it was to help companies tap into viral marketing, which was just becoming a thing. To help them do kind of like tell a friend type offers, track viral spread, the kind of things that are sort of built into a lot of platforms today.
15 years too early.
Yeah, maybe I think 10. Yeah. But anyway, so we send my plan out, and the plan is pretty much trashed by all the investors. When we get a response at all, it's really bad. But this one rejection letter kind of was the seed of everything that happened after. He said, listen, Andy, I rate every business plan I get on a scale of 1 to 10, and yours is a 1. And then in parentheses, he wrote worst, in case we thought 1 might be the top. But then he actually mailed a hard copy of our plan back to us. And in the margin, he wrote, not a compelling story. And I didn't pay much attention at first. Like I was pretty crushed by the 1. But a few weeks later, I'm walking by this Barnes & Noble, and there's this sign in the window, and it says, for anyone who wants to tell a compelling story. And that's me. And so I look, and the sign is pointing to this stack of books, and the books are about screenwriting, and something I know nothing about. But nothing to lose. I buy the books and start reading them. And what I realized is they have a very different approach to structuring the pitch. In the beginning, there's this idea now is very popular that a pitch should be like a movie. I actually think, most of that is not true. A pitch is not a 3-act screenplay. But there's something about the beginning of movies that's very, very, that has a lot of lessons, because the beginning of a movie is a pitch, really in 2 ways. It's a pitch to the main character to do something, to go on some journey usually. And it's a pitch also to the audience, to invest their time in the rest of the movie. And I found that the way they structure was quite different. And the biggest difference was that, the action yes, there are problems to be solved, for the main character, but that's not the starting point. The starting point is always an event that asks the main character and the audience really to start living by a new narrative, start playing a new game. Luke, you want to keep playing, you were playing that complaining teenager game. Well, look, now you're going to have to play this kind of caring adult, trusting the force game. And, I probably did a horrible job at incorporating that into our pitch, but I did it a little bit. I basically started with this phrase. It was something like, now the most valuable sales channel is going to be the people that your customers trust. In other words, like viral marketing, it's going to be the word of mouth basically. And we then set up the whole thing through that. And we sent it out to some new investors, and the change was like night and day, like how they responded to us.
Was that the only thing you really changed? Just that narrative?
That was the only thing we changed in the pitch. There were definitely some other things that happened that helped. So we got funded. This is a few months later. There were definitely some other things that happened. We got a buyout offer from Excite. We had launched our prototype, and Excite, which was like an early search engine competitor to Yahoo, and that actually fell through because they got then bought by an early ISP called At Home. But that kind of lit a little bit of fire under the VCs too. But the initial interest was not because of that. And that, we didn't change. It was the same team, the same product, everything except how we told this story. And this was really striking to me. The dot-com bloodbath was really hard for us, like everybody, but at least we managed to find an acquirer. And I think the story played a big role there too. By that point, I thought about, like, do I want to go do another startup or join one? And I thought but I was so much more interested in the story thing. And so I was actually writing a column in Inc. magazine for our startup, and an editor from Time Inc. Contacted me, said he's starting or going to be editor-in-chief of a magazine called Business 2.0. Do I want to join as a writer? And I was like, actually, yes. And so I actually became a journalist for about 6-7 years, and wrote like hundreds of stories, and eventually became an editor about entrepreneurs and new innovations. And I think there's that CEO to journalist path is probably not a well-trod career path, but there was a big similarity. Like, how do we get someone interested in something very quickly using words?
I want to pause you right there because Scott has written hundreds of pitches, right? I met Scott at early stage startups that did things. And Scott, I'm just asking you, is that what you were doing when you write these pitches? Did you realize you're sort of following the same kind of path that Andy is? Or was there a little bit of a nuance? I mean, there's obviously a nuance difference, but I'm just curious, from a guy who's written so many pitches for successful companies, how does that align with you? Or
well,
doesn't it?
It certainly aligns. I did not and have not taken the time to study, you know, storytelling and screenplay writing and journalism and all of this kind of stuff. I don't know. I just from the beginning sort of understood that in order to compel somebody to do something, there has to be some type of narrative there that is motivating. And I don't consider myself to be, you know, one of the smartest people on the planet. So like I need analogies and stories and things I can grab onto and hold onto and relate to and whatnot. And so that's just how I started, you know, writing these sales decks and scripts and that type of thing. You know, and so part of it maybe was just, you know, intuitive, part of it was dumb luck. And then part of it was, okay, this is clearly working. So I've got a bit of a, you know, process here to stick to and all that kind of thing. So, you know, I obviously agree with Andy. I would say that he took a much more scientific approach than I have. But, you know,
well, Scott, what I'd say is you're one of the lucky ones where it seems to come naturally, you know, and I think there's a lot of CEOs where it comes naturally, you know, obviously Jobs, Elon Musk, it seems, well, he seems to go back and forth between being great and being really bad. But you know, for me, and I think for a lot of people, it wasn't, I stayed away from story or English classes like my whole life. Like I was a pure math and science guy. Like this is the last thing I ever thought I'd be.
And interestingly enough, like I was the opposite. Right.
Oh, yeah.
Like I was terrible at, you know, science and like higher levels of math and all that kind of thing. But I was studying philosophy and religion and psychology. Right. So
you were getting it. Like it was already part of you. Right. I had to come to where you were already there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I had to go to the scientific side of sales and selling, which is like, look at all this data. I got to analyze all this data, right?
Yeah,
that stuff matters and so forth. Yeah.
So Scott, did you see what he said though? You're a cross between Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, and Scott Leese. Like that's pretty cool, man. Like congratulations.
I didn't hear that.
I don't know if I exactly said that, but I'm willing to give you that, Scott. If, yeah.
Yeah, I'm closer to Elon Musk when Elon Musk fails or sucks. that would be a compliment in and of itself.
Well, what I found really, you know, so, you know, this started by you asking kind of how I got to Mashery, and part of that was, you know, I got married in 2010, and already the writing was on the wall for the publishing industry. Like the magazine I worked at had closed, and you know, selling freelance pitches was getting harder and harder. And so it was natural for me to kind of go back to tech. And you mentioned, and you know that I worked at Skype as a product manager first in the developer program. And then that led to going to Mashery. And what was interesting to me there was when I started to see was, it wasn't just that storytelling, like it was this kind of skill that I could use to kind of brush up my pitches and make them better, but that the successful folks were like, there was this one story they were telling, that the CEOs were boiling it all down to this one, what I've come to call strategic narrative. You know, that post, the greatest sales deck I've ever seen, it really is not about the sales deck. You know, ostensibly it is, but what it's really about is that Tien Tzuo, the CEO of Zuora, has boiled everything down to this one story that everybody's telling, including the folks through sales.
So let's pause there for a second, right? Because you were at Skype, and you know, literally 10 or 11 years ago. That I assume that was pre-Microsoft purchase.
Yes, just before that. So yes, that's right.
So fast forward 10 years, and we're in the middle of this COVID thing, and all of a sudden it's all about Zoom, right? And for me, it's like people kind of knew about Skype. Like, what do you think? What happened? Why isn't Skype getting the level of love and play that Zoom is from your, you know, whatever level?
Why aren't we on Skype right now? Said differently.
And I think it has everything to do with what we're talking about, which is the narrative. So what was Skype's narrative when it came out and became successful? It was free phone calls. And that narrative was what drove Skype's revenue model. Hey, you can make free phone calls over the internet. You want to make a call to somebody's phone, like their landline or their mobile phone, pay us a little bit. And it'll be cheaper than regular phone calls. And this became the cash cow of Skype. And this became the narrative that everybody thought of Skype as, oh, it's like cheaper than phone calls. The interesting thing is, when we were at Skype, when I was at Skype, everything at Skype happened on Skype. So everything we're doing on Zoom today, we did on Skype, multi-person video. In fact, everything you can do on Slack, pretty much, we did on Skype. You could set up channels and have rooms that, I had a room of, like, there was a room of competition. People would post stuff about if there was competition, you could follow that, and you could follow different conversations, all of this stuff. But Skype was kind of trapped in this high-level narrative about free phone calls. And yes,
they also were approaching it from a B2C approach, right? It was all about the consumer. It wasn't necessarily about the business to business side.
Right. I mean, they had a unit called Skype for Business, and they sold business plans. But, once that high level narrative is about that thing, like you said, this consumer thing about, free phone calls or cheap phone calls, very hard to move it to, oh yeah, and we're also about that. It's hard to have like these multiple stories. And right. So I think Zoom came along when, there was this news story about remote work and how, the operations of companies happening this way. And, a combination of that and having this great product that sort of, that worked and fit it, sort of magic combination.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about, so for those who don't know, Andy, for lack of a better phrase, goes in and helps define this narrative, right? Helps people to sort of hone in on, what's the story you want to tell, right? And I assume it's beyond the value, right? Beyond your value statement and those kinds of things. Talk to people a little bit about that. Like, how did they, without giving away your service for free, but what advice would you give someone to say, help me, I want to recraft my story. I need to understand my story better. What kind of advice do you give to people?
Yeah. So, I used to see my role kind of like almost like a creative agency. I come in, I kind of, talk to everybody. I go back to my cave. I kind of write down, hey, here's what I think the narrative should be. By the way, we'll get into, what is the form? What are we even talking about when we're talking about what the narrative is, and like, what form does it take? And I really believe it one of the best forms it can take is the sales deck. We'll get to that in a second. But so I used to go and then I'd say, okay, here, what about this as a sales flow? It's a narrative to guide a sales conversation or whatever. And then I get feedback, and they'd say, oh, I like this, don't like this. And I kind of come back and we go back and this back and forth. And it worked okay. But because there was so much of this back and forth, my lead time for new projects got very long. And then that Greatest Sales Deck article came out, and it was like 4 or 5 months before I could start working with another team. And so this one CEO said to me, listen, Andy, I've read that post. I've read all your other posts. How about instead of you going back to your cave, we run the same process that, you go through, but I'll go back to my cave and I'll build it. And you just be available to like talk to me or come to my cave whenever I want. And I was like, well, that's not going to work because I'm the genius, who writes the story, And
it's so interesting though. You wanted to do all the work because my brain is like, perfect. I don't have to do
exactly how Scott thinks.
Work.
Eventually, yes. Yeah. And, you know, but I didn't want to, but I was like, well, they're going to mess it up, you know? And wow, I couldn't have been more wrong about that. This project, so he convinced me, he was very persuasive. And he convinced me to do it. And this became the best project I ever did. And the team kind of bought it, like owned it in a way that I had never seen before. And it started appearing in all kinds of places.
What do you mean? So hold on, stop right there. One, if you can't, I understand, but are you comfortable saying who this person was or the name of their company? Are you allowed to?
I think they wouldn't mind, but I don't know that I have actual permission to say it, so I'm not going to say it. Yeah.
Okay. So then let me ask you, said, so as I was interpreting what you said, it kind of spread like wildfire. Everybody was owning it. What does that mean? Like, what were the things that you saw people doing with it that let you know this?
It was the sales deck. It was they were about to do a new round, and it was like basically became the center of the investor deck. I started seeing it on. They were sort of producing swag with this stuff on it. So this was happening in a way that I thought was really interesting. And what was also interesting too is, you know, this was a few years ago, and eventually it changed. And what happened too was, as it changed, they would tell me about it, and they were still using the same basic framework to think about how it changed. So what I really liked is I also gave them sort of the expertise around how to think about this stuff and how to evolve it as, you know, their market's going to change. And
you taught them to fish instead of giving them.
Exactly.
You taught them to fish.
Yeah.
And so is that, by the way, is that how you know when you got it? It's like, hey, when I'm willing to put this on my swag, then I know I've got the right narrative.
Well, I actually think it's the sales deck because, you know, I really believe that this strategic narrative has to come from the CEO, has to come from the leader. If it comes from marketing or comes from someone else, it's not going to take hold. I think we've all experienced this. I did a post about this the other day on LinkedIn and seemed to get a lot of resonance. That said, like, what is the asset? Like, how does the CEO communicate that in a way that it does permeate? And, you know, typically, at least on the marketing side, they're taught to construct a story and have it live in a place that nobody actually sees. So it's some positioning statement, or what some marketers call our messaging house. It lives in this house, which is like some diagram in a PowerPoint presentation of a collection of messages. And the idea is that the thinking was, hey, we go back to this house or this positioning statement, and it would be our guiding light when we're producing a sales deck or producing our website or content and all this stuff. And in my experience, that never happens. We build this thing, or marketing builds it, or whatever, and it's sort of we're building the sales deck and we're kind of starting from scratch. We're building the website and we're starting from scratch. And so I really thought, like, what, and through my experiences at Mashery and other places, like, what is the asset that if we could get the story articulated there, then I'd know it was going to be basically it would live. And I came to the sales deck, and I know, you know, I'm not saying that everyone has to use a sales deck. What I'm saying is, can we articulate it in a kind of sales narrative form? Whether you actually use. I was
going to call this episode "Why Everybody Has to Use a Sales Deck" by Andy Raskin.
Excuse me, what?
I was going to call this episode "Why Everybody Has to Use a Sales Deck" by Andy Raskin.
Thank you. Did totally destroy me on modern sales pros. Thank you.
Have you taken this kind of carefully crafted narrative approach to building your brand? Let's call it on LinkedIn and various platforms, or did that did that just kind of happen by chance because you wrote a few things that, blew up and all these people kind of, found you because of that? I'm curious what's been your tactic there.
Scott, are you asking like, am I using the strategic narrative approach in building my strategic narrative?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at my posts and pretty much what I write about, I do talk about the basic structure of this strategic narrative, whether it's Zuora, now Gong, originally Salesforce, is old game, new game. So,
do you fix it? Do you focus your posts on that kind of dynamic? Like, is it always about this kind of same central story, old school versus new school type of thing?
I wouldn't say that every post lays it out. It lays out the old, what was the old game, what was the new game. But in general, all of my content is about what this new game means, how it changes the game, how it changes how you have to act to thrive.
Yeah.
And typically that's about how you're a CEO, how you're doing sales, marketing, whatever, how this new game affects everybody.
These engagements that you have, I think I read somewhere on your profile or site or something that they tend to last about 6 to 8 weeks. Is that correct?
Yeah, for the initial one, to get the CEO to build the narrative and to have a lot of back and forth between the leadership team, and to also, to some extent, test it in sales. So test it in some real sales calls.
But what fascinates me and what I'm curious about, because you've been at this on your own for longer than I have, and I know there's a lot of people who listen to us who are, in business for themselves or thinking about it, and getting out of working for other people. What's fascinating to me is you've got this kind of project-based business, and these customers presumably work with you for, call it 2 months, and then you've done what you need to do with them. And then it's like, shit, I better find new customers constantly, right? And if you're deep in the weeds of working with CEOs and other executives and whatnot, how does one find the time in your line of work right now? How do you find the time to find new clients? How does the prospecting part work for a solopreneur, right, who's selling themselves as a service, basically? How do you approach that?
I think in a way we've kind of covered it, which is what you mentioned about content. So I don't think that I could do what I'm doing today in a world where things like LinkedIn, Medium, certainly social media did not exist.
Yeah.
All of the work I've done has been inbound. Whether I'd say most of it has been from people reading the content. Certainly that greatest sales deck post, but other posts as well.
So you use your content essentially as prospecting. You produce content, you do it consistently, it casts a larger and larger net. People find it, then people dig in a little deeper, find you and what you do. Yeah,
although, I don't really think about it so tactically that way. I just really enjoy writing about this stuff. So I think that maybe that comes through. I enjoy thinking about this stuff and sort of seeing how it applies in different ways. And I don't know, maybe that energy about it has, I've been in companies where, we had to just churn out content and it was like a job. And I think that's not gonna work. So it has to really be, come from something you're really interested in and excited about.
Are you somebody who's even capable of producing content if you're not like inspired? I'm not. This is why I'm asking. Like, if somebody said to me, like, you have to put out, an article like every single day about something, I can't do that. You know what I mean? Like, if the spirit doesn't compel me, then nothing comes out.
I'm like you too. What I'd say though is when I do so, and yeah, I definitely I don't force myself to do one thing every day. I pretty much do wait until I get something interesting. But then, there's a balance to that. Like I'm working on a book, and the book is it's really like that at that length. It's hard,
Yeah,
and I do
I'm in
have
that place right now.
the quarantine. If there's any silver lining to quarantine, I think it's that a lot of people are getting time to work on their books with no excuses, and that's certainly for me. And one thing I find is, when I'm forced to, sometimes uh, the the uh, the inspiration comes, and I try not to write stuff. I try not to just put stuff out that isn't inspired, but that doesn't mean I can't start working on something where I'm not quite feeling it, and then somehow get to a place that feels better. That happens a lot, I'd say.
Yeah.
There's this great sculptor in the Bay Area. I'm going to forget his name, so forgive me. Maybe I'll remember it, and I can give it to you for the link, but for later. But I think his fame started around the 60s and 70s, and people asked him. He has this idea he calls the magic man, and the magic man is this sort of invisible figure that visits you as an artist in your studio and gives you the great ideas and tells you what to do. But the catch is he only visits you if you're in the studio struggling and working through stuff. So
that's pretty funny.
I do subscribe to this idea, and I'm always waiting for a visit from the magic man or woman or whatever you want.
It sounds like the Tambourine Man, right?
Whatever works for you.
Candy Man, right? Those two songs from long time ago.
Whatever's going to work in your metaphorical world. That's fine.
Yeah. What are you seeing people do now, right? Like, so we're in the middle of this COVID thing. To your point, it is a time to go back and reassess, rewrite some things. Are you seeing companies do that? How are they even adjusting? Maybe not even that might be for what they do when they get out of it. How are they adjusting their narratives now? I assume you have people calling you to say, Andy, what do I say now? What do I do?
In a way, well, I have had some of those, and I've also had a lot of like podcast and sort of like panel interview invites to talk about this kind of stuff. And in a way, I feel like it's a different question. So the strategic narrative that I'm talking about, this one story that's sort of, powering the company, that we're acting as if that's really what we're selling. Zuora really acts like they're selling the subscription economy, not some software package. The software package is almost like a prop in the story that they're selling. That's different from what I think what's happening now, which is this crisis. And in many ways, I think the people who are the best equipped to talk about this are the people who are, versed in like crisis PR, or the people who are kind of on the front lines in, sales and marketing and other, who are trying to figure out every day what works. I think new stories, new narratives will emerge out of this. And in some cases, some companies will keep telling the same story, and this will just feel like another point in that narrative. Like, Gong is a great example. Like, they're telling this story about, hey, goodbye opinions, old game, hello reality, new game. And part of what triggered the new game is that, hey, we're recording conversations now, and we have AI, and we can mine that stuff for information and get this real view into what's happening. Well, this is only, accelerating that and making that same story even better, even stronger. So I'm kind of sitting this out in terms of like giving people advice on how to handle this. I do hope that I think a lot of new narratives will come out of this, or strengthen narratives. And I do hope I'll have the chance to help, CEOs and their teams tell those strategically, but not right now.
That's one of the things I love about you, is that you are very capable of sort of saying, I may not be the right person to ask this question to, right? Like that's I think that brings a tremendous value to who you are, and having worked with you and known you, that's just part of who Andy is, not even Andy Raskin, self-employed, author in waiting, kind of a person. So, what's the book about? What are you going to be? I mean, is it this in a different format? Is there anything exciting? Any earth-shattering news we can share with people?
No, it's about this. It's all about this. And it's about, I put out that framework in the greatest sales deck post, which has like 5 pieces. And, every day I get email or message from somebody who says, hey, this helped me sell, whether it was, my company vision from CEOs, or whether it was an actual salesperson saying that, literally people telling me like it's helped them get jobs, like tell the story of my, in my job interview of myself. And they're always asking questions like, so how do I apply this? Or how do I apply that? And in some cases, by the way, I've gotten like, hey, it didn't work. And then I'll look and I'll say, well, can I see it? And often I'd say 9 times out of 10, they've taken the Zuora deck and just kind of pasted in their own logo and changed a few words. So I've been just getting a lot of requests for like, how do I think about kind of this in a broader context? How do I apply it to my situation? And so this book is really about that, kind of the theoretical underpinnings of a strategic narrative, why it works, and then how to kind of apply it in many different situations. So yeah, that's what it's about. Thanks for asking.
I was really hoping that part of the book would be about how to go to a startup and have it get acquired in a year, which you seem to have figured out like multiple times, right? So everybody wants to solve that mystery. What are a couple things what are a couple pieces of advice that you might give to people who are about to go through an acquisition or are just on the other side of the acquisition? I can think of a lot of salespeople and account executives right now who are uneasy because they just got bought and they're not, nothing has happened yet, but they're unsure if their position is going to be eliminated. What does the other side of an acquisition look like from your perspective?
I don't think I'm like, so Richard asked the question earlier, I think like, Andy, have you ever actually been in sales? The answer is no, I have not. I mean, I was a CEO, and so I was selling, and the marketing side, as Richard said, I worked with sales teams quite a bit, but I've never been a salesperson. And so I don't know that I feel qualified to give advice to salespeople.
Is it like, but you have been at places though that were acquired even as a product marketer. Suppose we change let's change the narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. And
I'm on the marketing team. There's already a marketing team that exists. Oh shit, what should I do?
Yeah. Even when the company gets acquired, there's this new challenge, right? We used to have to tell the story to customers. We had to tell it to our internal team. Now we've got to also tell it to this bigger organization. What are we going to play? What role are we going to play in this bigger company? In some cases, the bigger company actually takes on the narrative of the smaller one. This is happening, by the way. So there is a company that I can say it because the CEO is going to be in my podcast, my next podcast episode. So this company is called SkySlope, and they're in the real estate space. They have a SaaS platform for real estate brokers, and they were acquired by Fidelity, not the investment Fidelity, but the Fidelity is a company that that does some lion's share of the title processing. So when you buy a home and you have to go and sign for the title to get changed, that they do that. And so they bought SkySlope, and the CEO of SkySlope, he had been talking to me about working together. Then they get and we sort of never happened. Then they get acquired, and he says, "Hey, we just got acquired. Now I want to work with you." I'm like, "What? What? You got acquired? Like, isn't?" And turns out, first of all, like I think the way he's still there, and I think he must have incentives about doing well. But there was this whole thing about how he's going to tell the story of SkySlope within Fidelity, and also, of course, to his own employees about, hey, what does that mean for us? Are we going to be sort of this sideshow, or are we going to have a main role? So it became this. It was the same thing. How are we going to craft this narrative? And that became the focus of our work. And it's been interesting to see the parent company now, to some degree, has started to take some of this narrative as well.
That feels like the same story from Discover.org and ZoomInfo, right? Discover.org bought ZoomInfo. They did all this analysis and realized that ZoomInfo had the stronger brand name, and they have had to rewrite that narrative. So that's always an interesting story to me, of how do you do that, right? And I know Henry, the CEO over there, and I think he's done a tremendous job. I don't know if you're allowed to say anything, but have you worked with them at all on this, or do you know of this?
I have not. No.
Okay. So, well, cool, and this has been awesome, man. We really appreciate your time, and how are you and your family doing? I know you're homeschooling. I know that you've got one son who's 7 years old. How are you and the wife handling it?
So my wife works, so she's in our office. I'm actually in our bedroom. Is it
a long commute from the office to the bedroom?
Thankfully, or not, not that long, but he does that commute between the two of us, and thankfully, like, his teachers are now getting their act together in terms of online schooling. He also does Taekwondo, which his teachers were, like, from the very beginning, like, started to do their classes online, and you have not experienced mute button rage until you've been on a call with like 100 7-year-olds doing Taekwondo. But they eventually got that figured out, and that's been a real godsend. So I know you have kids too, right, Richard? How are you guys doing?
Yeah, Scott and I both have kids. We both have boys, 12 and 10. So, which is part of why our bond and relationship works, because we can sit down and we have our own little.
We suffer together.
Happy hours.
Yeah, we suffer together.
Right.
Scott, what does that say on that note behind you? I just barely can't read it.
That is a note that says, you don't get good at anything by giving up, except giving up. And my son, who is now 10, said that when he was 5 years old.
Wow.
And wrote it down, because I was like, how the hell does this 5-year-old, speak so profoundly? And I sure as hell, and everybody probably needs that reminder and reference. So I found it in the office, which is now where I'm working all the time, is cleaning stuff up. I found it and was like, I'm just going to pin that up.
That's so cool.
I leave it there.
Yeah, my son's Taekwondo. When we used to go to the actual space, they have a big banner that says, "A black belt is a white belt who never gave up."
Nice.
And that is a good or the way it's expressed there is a good narrative to live by.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's the title of the episode right there, Richard. Waited like a good storyteller. He waited till the very end to deliver the goods.
Yeah.
Well done.
And like an even better one, you found the TLDR version.
So,
is there anything that we can do for you, man? Is there any way that we can be helpful? We try to end every episode with this offer, and whatever that means, whatever shape and form that takes.
Well, I used to do like workshops at General Assembly every month that were in person that I would sometimes tell folks about. And a lot of salespeople come to them and tell me they've gotten a lot out of them. They're on hold now, obviously. I'm really hoping that I can go back to doing stuff in person. I really love doing this stuff in person versus online. But maybe I'll be that just won't be possible, and we'll do it online. But yeah, for now, nothing I have to plug or anything like that. I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm always writing about this stuff on LinkedIn. So if anybody wants to, to learn more about this stuff, that's usually a good place to connect with me on LinkedIn.
Great.
What's the name of your podcast?
Oh yeah, so my podcast is called The Bigger Narrative, and I have my mother hates the name, and the first episode starts with her telling me why. But each episode I have a CEO on, and we talk about their narrative and how they, what it is, how it works for them, how they use it strategically, not only to sell, but also to align their teams and all the rest.
That's really good. We've done one episode with the wives, right? We did the wives of living with people.
I'm not prepared to bring my mother on to that.
Oh, I'm totally prepared to bring Scott's
I
mother.
guarantee my mom is listening. I'm not prepared to bring you.
Trust me, I was not either. She happened to be visiting, and she was like giving me shit about the name of my podcast. And so I was like, okay, Mom, let's just record this. And then I put it on LinkedIn, and she kind of became this minor star.
Oh man.
Some would say the star of my podcast.
To Scott's mom, my phone number is 415-596-9149. I will gladly do one. Maybe we'll do it as a birthday celebration for Scott in June. We won't even we did it. We'll just roll it out. So I would love to talk and to Scott's dad too. I want to hear those stories too. I want to hear the other side. So
nobody wants to hear those stories.
Believe me, Scott, they do. Believe me. I'd be willing to bet that Andy's mom's episode is probably one of the most popular episodes because when people find
now I have her. She introduced. Basically, I sent her the interview I do with the CEO in advance, and then she intros the show with her take on kind of what people are going to get out of it. So she kind of boils it down, and I found that's kind of helped get into these shows. She does it better than I do.
Congrats on teaching your mother that much technology, because my mom wouldn't. I would be pulling, the rest of my hair out of my arms if I had to teach my mom how to do that. So
there is a little bit of that. There is a little bit of that frustration. Yeah.
So, Andy, man, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Yeah,
great seeing with you both. Good to see you again, Scott, and great to meet you as well. Good to see you again, Richard, and great to meet you, Scott.
Yeah,
you too.
All right, man. Stay in touch and stay healthy.
Okay, you too, both of you.